She slapped a human ambassador. Now her empire regrets ever meeting him. The crystal spires of Xenthos Prime gleamed like frozen lightning against the crimson sky as Ambassador Marcus Kane stepped from his transport pod.
Ow.
The human diplomatic vessel had traveled 3 months through hyperspace to reach this moment. Carrying hopes for the first alliance between Earth and the mighty Xenthari Empire, Marcus adjusted his formal diplomatic robes, feeling the weight of his mission. At 32, he was young for an ambassador, but his quick mind and silver tongue had earned him this crucial assignment. The Xenthari controlled 17 star systems and possessed technology that could revolutionize human civilization. Alliance could secure humanity's future among the stars. The palace guards, towering beings with scaled skin and luminous eyes, escorted him through corridors that seemed carved from pure starlight. Everything about Xenthari architecture spoke of power and ancient pride. Marcus had studied their culture extensively, but being surrounded by such alien majesty still took his breath away. In the great throne hall, nobles gathered like exotic birds in their flowing robes and ceremonial armor. At the center of it all, upon a throne of living crystal, sat Princess Zaravex. Even by Xenthari standards, she was striking. Her silver-blue skin seemed to shimmer with inner light, and her violet eyes held the fierce intelligence of a born warrior. The ceremonial blade at her side wasn't just decoration. Marcus had read the reports of her victories in the border conflicts. So Princess Zara's voice carried across the silent hall. Earth sends us a child to negotiate the fate of worlds. Marcus felt every eye in the room upon him as he approached the throne. He'd faced hostile negotiations before, but never with stakes this high. The princess studied him like a predator evaluating prey, her expression mixing curiosity with barely concealed disdain. "Your Highness," Marcus bowed precisely as his cultural briefings had instructed, "I come bearing the friendship and respect of the Terran Federation. We seek partnership between our peoples, built on mutual benefit and shared goals." Laughter rippled through the court. Princess Zara rose from her throne, descending the crystal steps with fluid grace. "Partnership?" she mused, circling him slowly. "Tell me, little ambassador, what could your young species possibly offer the heirs of a 1,000-year empire?" Marcus kept his voice steady, despite the obvious provocation. "Innovation, fresh perspectives, and the determination that comes from fighting for every step forward. Humanity may be young, but we learn quickly and adapt faster." "Adapt." Zara stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns tattooed along her throat. "Is that what you call your species' talent for creating chaos wherever you go? We've heard the reports from the Centauri incident. The Centauri incident, a diplomatic disaster that had cost his predecessor his career." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral. Every species makes mistakes as they find their place in the galaxy. The question is whether we learn from them. Princess Zara's eyes flashed dangerously. "And what makes you think the Xenthari Empire needs lessons in learning from a species that barely mastered fire when we were already sailing between stars?" The insult hung in the air like a blade. Marcus felt the assembled nobles watching, waiting to see how the human would respond to such blatant disrespect. His diplomatic training warred with a flash of genuine anger. Here he was, trying to forge peace between civilizations, and this privileged princess treated it like a game. "Perhaps," Marcus said quietly, "because wisdom isn't measured in years alone, but in the courage to embrace new possibilities rather than cling to old prejudices." The hall fell dead silent. Several nobles gasped audibly. Princess Zara's eyes widened, then narrowed to violet slits. In Xenthari culture, such a direct challenge to royal authority was unthinkable. "You dare," she began, her voice rising. "I dare to speak truth in pursuit of peace," Marcus interrupted, taking a step forward. "If that offends your highness, perhaps the Xenthari Empire isn't as ready for galactic leadership as it claims." The crack of her palm against his cheek echoed through the crystal hall like a gunshot. Marcus's head snapped to the side, his cheek burning from the force of the blow. When he turned back to face her, Princess Zara stood trembling with rage and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Guards!" she commanded, But Marcus held up a hand. "Yo," he said calmly, touching the red mark on his face. "I deserved that. I pushed too hard, too fast. In human culture, we sometimes mistake directness for strength. I apologize for any disrespect, Your Highness." Princess Zara stared at him, confusion replacing fury. In her experience, challenged males either cowered or exploded with violence. This human had done neither. He'd taken her blow, acknowledged his error, yet somehow maintained his dignity in the process. Double quotes, she began, then caught herself. Around them, the court buzzed with whispered conversations. This unprecedented scene would be discussed for years to come. "Perhaps," Marcus continued, straightening his diplomatic robes, "we could begin. Again, I'm Marcus Kane, representative of humanity's hope for friendship with the Zenthari Empire. I believe our peoples have much to offer each other if we can move past our mutual prejudices. Ergo." He extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Princess Zara looked at it for a long moment, acutely aware that every noble in the hall was watching this historic moment. The human had surprised her twice now, first with his boldness, then with his grace under pressure. Against her better judgment, she found herself reaching out to clasp his offered hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt an unexpected jolt of ... something, connection, recognition. She couldn't name it, but it left her more unsettled than his earlier provocation. "Very well, Marcus Kane of Earth," she said, her voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "Let us see if humanity's reputation for surprises extends to their diplomatic skills. But know this, you are no longer just an ambassador here. By striking a royal person, I have invoked the ancient law of guardianship. Until honor is satisfied, you are under my protection and my authority." Marcus felt his blood run cold as understanding dawned. He'd come to negotiate an alliance and instead found himself bound by alien law to the very princess he'd been sent to convince. As the implications sank in, he realized his mission had just become infinitely more complicated. The princess smiled. And for the first time since his arrival, Marcus wondered if he'd bitten off more than he could chew. 3 days had passed since the infamous slap heard throughout the Empire, and Marcus Kane was beginning to understand the true weight of Zenthari honor laws. Princess Zara had not exaggerated about the guardianship bond. He was now quite literally under her protection and authority, a fact that seemed to amuse her greatly. "You will accompany me to the morning war council," she announced, sweeping into his assigned quarters without ceremony. Marcus, who had been reviewing diplomatic files over breakfast, nearly choked on his Terran coffee. "Your Highness, I'm not qualified to attend military briefings. My expertise is in trade negotiations and cultural exchange." Zara paused in her inspection of his sparse accommodations. "The law is clear, Ambassador. Where I go, you follow. Besides," she added with a sly smile, "perhaps it's time you learned what the Zenthari Empire truly faces." The War Council chamber was a study in controlled chaos. Holographic star maps floated above a circular table, while uniformed officers debated troop movements and supply lines. At the head of the table sat General Corvan, Princess Zara's uncle, and the Emperor's brother. His scarred face spoke of decades in the military, and his cold eyes held no warmth when they fell upon Marcus. "Niece," General Corvan's voice carried, barely concealed disapproval. "Surely this human has no business in matters of imperial security." "The human has a name, Uncle Zara," replied smoothly, guiding Marcus to a seat beside her own. "And as my ward Ambassador Kane is entitled to observe." Marcus felt the hostile stares of the assembled officers like physical weight. He was clearly unwelcome here, a fact General Corvan seemed determined to emphasize. "Very well," the general continued, "but let the record show, I protest this breach of protocol." He activated the central hologram, revealing a sector map marked with red warning zones. "The Varaxian Syndicate has been testing our border defenses again. 3 merchant vessels attacked in the past week." As the briefing continued, Marcus found himself drawn into the tactical discussion despite his diplomatic background. The Varaxian problem was more complex than simple piracy. It was a systematic probe for weaknesses in Zenthari space. When General Corvan proposed a massive military response, Marcus couldn't help himself. "Forgive me," he interjected, causing every head to turn toward him. "But wouldn't such a large deployment leave your core systems vulnerable? The Varaxians might be trying to draw your forces away from something more valuable." The silence that followed was deafening. General Corvin's face darkened with anger. "The human presumes to lecture us on military strategy." The human Princess Zara said before Marcus could respond. "Makes an interesting point. Continue, Ambassador." Marcus felt sweat gathering on his palms but pressed on. "In human military history, we call it a feint. Make your enemy overcommit. 2. Defending against a fake threat while you prepare your real attack elsewhere. If I were planning to strike at the Xanthari Empire, I'd want your fleet chasing pirates while I moved on. Your industrial centers, your communication hubs." One of the younger officers, a Captain Jorik, leaned forward with interest. "The Nexus Array," he said quietly. "If someone took out our primary communication relay—" "Impossible," General Corvin snapped. "The Nexus is heavily defended." "Against external threats," Marcus agreed, "but what about internal ones? How many people have access to the array's security protocols?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Princess Zara's violet eyes had gone very still, a sign Marcus was learning to recognize as dangerous. "Uncle," she said carefully, "how many people know the array's vulnerabilities?" "That information is classified above your clearance level, niece," General Corvin replied stiffly. "Even yours." For the first time since Marcus had met her, Princess Zara looked genuinely surprised. Clearance for strategic assets? Since the Council of Lords deemed it necessary, the general said, there are ... concerns about information security. Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind like a puzzle. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "who benefits if the Xanthari Empire appears weak to potential allies?" She turned to stare at him, understanding dawning in her expression. "Someone who wants to prevent alliances," she whispered. "Someone who profits from isolation." General Corvin's hand had moved subtly toward his sidearm. "That's enough speculation from the human. This council is dismissed." As the officers filed out, Marcus noticed several exchanging meaningful glances. The political undercurrents here ran deeper than he'd realized, and he was beginning to suspect that his diplomatic mission had walked into something far more dangerous than trade negotiations. "Walk with me," Princess Zara murmured as they left the chamber. She led him through corridors he hadn't seen before, finally stopping at a private balcony overlooking the palace gardens. "You think there's a conspiracy?" she said without preamble. "Think someone doesn't want this alliance to succeed?" Marcus replied carefully. "The question is whether they're working alone or as part of something larger." Zara moved closer to the balcony railing, her profile silhouetted against the alien sunset. "My uncle has been different since my father fell ill. More secretive. More controlling. Your father is sick." "Nothing life-threatening," she said quickly, "but enough to limit his daily activities. The Council of Lords has been assuming more authority in his absence." She turned to face him fully. "Marcus, what? If that incident in the throne room wasn't coincidence, what if someone wanted to discredit both of us?" The thought chilled him. "You mean the insults? The provocation? What if my anger was being orchestrated?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What if we've both been played?" Before Marcus could respond, the soft hum of energy weapons filled the air. Red targeting dots danced across the balcony walls as dark figures emerged from the garden shadows below. Down. Zara shouted, tackling Marcus behind the stone railing as pulse blasts seared the air where they'd been standing. She drew her ceremonial blade, its edge beginning to glow with contained energy. "Stay low," she commanded, peering over the edge. "To count their attackers. 6 of them, military-grade equipment. This isn't random." Marcus's diplomatic training had included basic combat awareness, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of being under fire on an alien world. "Can you call for help?" "My personal comm is being jammed," Zara replied grimly. "We're on our own." As if to punctuate her words, grappling hooks sailed over the balcony edge. Their attackers were coming up fast. Princess Zara rose into a combat. "Crouch," her blade humming with deadly energy. "When I move," she told Marcus, "you run for the door." "Get to the palace guard and no," Marcus said firmly, surprising them both. "I'm not leaving you?" She stared at him. "You're a diplomat, not a warrior. And you're under my protection as much as I'm under yours," he replied, picking up a heavy crystal ornament from a nearby table. "Besides, I'm full of surprises, remember?" The first attacker crested the balcony just as Zara struck. Her blade carved through his armor like paper, but 3 more were already climbing over the edge. Marcus threw his improvised weapon with desperate accuracy, catching one assailant in the faceplate and sending him tumbling back into the garden. But as more attackers appeared, Marcus realized they were badly outnumbered. Princess Zara fought like poetry in motion, her blade dancing through defensive patterns he'd never imagined. But even she couldn't be everywhere at once. That's when the balcony door burst open, and Captain Jorik charged through with a squad of palace guards. The tide of battle turned in seconds, leaving their attackers dead or fleeing into the gathering darkness. "Your Highness," Captain Jorik panted. "We heard weapons fire." "You hurt?" "We're fine," Zara replied, though Marcus could see her hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. But this was no random attack. Someone wanted us both dead. As palace security swept the area for evidence, Marcus found himself studying Princess Zara with new eyes. The fierce warrior he'd first met was still there, but now he'd seen the strategic mind beneath the royal facade she'd been right about. The conspiracy, and probably about being manipulated into that confrontation in the throne room. "Thank you," she said quietly, as they watched the guards work. "For staying, for not running." "Thank you for keeping us both alive," he replied. "I had no idea you could fight like that." Something shifted in her expression, a softness he hadn't seen before. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Marcus Kane." "I'd like to," he heard himself say, then felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I mean, for diplomatic purposes, understanding your culture." Princess Zara smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Of course, diplomatic purposes. But as their gazes held in the growing twilight, Marcus suspected that diplomacy was becoming the least of his concerns. The assassination attempt had changed everything. Within hours of the attack, Princess Zara and Marcus found themselves effectively prisoners in the palace, surrounded by guards whose loyalty was increasingly questionable. General Corvin had insisted on enhanced security measures that looked suspiciously like house arrest. "We can't stay here," Zara whispered, as she slipped into Marcus's quarters through a hidden passage she'd known since childhood. "I've been monitoring communications. Half my personal guard has been reassigned, and the ones remaining won't meet my eyes." Marcus looked up from the intelligence reports he'd been studying. "Your uncle's moving fast, too fast for this to be improvised." "Agreed. Which means we need to disappear before he decides that enhanced security isn't enough." She moved to his window, checking the courtyard below. "I have a safe house in the outer provinces. We can regroup there and figure out who we can trust." "Running will make us look guilty," Marcus pointed out. "Staying will make us dead," she countered. "Your choice, Ambassador." Marcus closed his files and reached for his travel pack. "Lead the way, Your Highness." They left through maintenance tunnels beneath the palace, emerging in the industrial district as the night shift began their work. Zara had traded her royal robes for simple traveler's clothes, but even disguised, she moved with unconscious authority. Marcus found himself watching the fluid grace of her movements as they navigated the crowded streets. Transport pad is 2 blocks ahead, she murmured, pulling a hood over her distinctive silver hair. We'll take a public shuttle to the outer rim. Then switch to the energy blast that scorched the wall beside her head, cut off her words. More shots followed as armored figures emerged from the crowd, their faces hidden behind tactical masks.
This
way. Zara grabbed Marcus's hand and pulled him into a maze of narrow alleys between industrial buildings. Behind them, boots pounded on pavement as their pursuers gave chase. How did they find us so fast? Marcus gasped as they ran. Tracking implants, Zara replied grimly. Every member of the royal family has them for security. I should have thought. She stumbled as another energy blast grazed her shoulder, leaving a smoking hole in her jacket. Marcus caught her before she could fall, his arm supporting her weight. How far to your safe house? He asked. Too far, she admitted, wincing as she pressed a hand to her wounded shoulder. We need another option. Marcus looked around desperately, then spotted something that made him smile despite their situation. There, he pointed to a cargo transport sitting on a nearby loading dock. Can you fly one of those? Of course, but it's probably locked not. Any more? Marcus interrupted, producing a small device from his diplomatic kit. Emergency override codes. Comes in handy during evacuations. Zara stared at him with new respect as the cargo transport systems came online. Remind me never to underestimate human resourcefulness. They lifted off just as their pursuers rounded the corner, pulse weapons lighting up the night sky. Transport was built for hauling freight, not speed, but it was sturdy enough to absorb the incoming fire as they climbed toward the upper atmosphere. Where to? Marcus asked, taking the co-pilot's seat. Coordinates uploading now, Zara replied, her fingers dancing over the navigation console, despite her injured shoulder. The Whispering Peaks, my grandmother's hunting lodge. The flight took 3 hours, carrying them over landscapes that shifted from industrial sprawl to agricultural zones to wild mountain territory. Marcus found himself stealing glances at Zara. As she piloted, noting how the starlight played across her features, when she caught him looking, he felt his cheeks warm. Something wrong? She asked. Just thinking about how we got here, he replied. A week ago, I was planning trade negotiations. Now I'm fleeing assassins with an alien princess. Alien. Zara raised an eyebrow. How flattering. You know what I meant, Marcus said, but he was smiling. Though I have to admit, this is more excitement than most diplomatic missions provide. Stick with me, Ambassador. Guarantee your life will never be boring again. The hunting lodge sat on a cliff overlooking a valley that seemed carved from moonlight and shadow. Ancient by Zenthari standards, it was built from local stone and blended seamlessly with the mountainside. Solar collectors and defensive sensors were the only signs of modern technology. My grandmother was a remarkable woman, Zara explained as they secured the transport in a hidden hangar. She believed the royal family should remember their roots, stay connected to the land and people they served. Sounds like wisdom runs in your family, Marcus observed. Along with stubbornness and a talent for making enemies, Zara added wryly. Come on, let's get that shoulder looked at. The lodge's interior was surprisingly warm and comfortable, filled with hunting trophies and star charts from Zara's grandmothers. Exploration days. A medical station in one corner showed that the princess had prepared for emergencies. I can handle it myself, Zara protested as Marcus examined her wound. Let me, he said gently. I have some medical training. Cores requires basic field medicine. As he cleaned and bandaged the pulse burn, Marcus was acutely aware of her closeness, the way her breath caught when the antiseptic stung, the trust she was showing by letting him care for her. Their eyes met as he sealed the bandage, and something electric passed between them. Marcus, she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. I know, he replied, his hand still resting on her shoulder. This complicates everything. Maybe everything was already complicated, she whispered. The space between them seemed to shrink without either moving. Marcus could see flecks of silver in her violet eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. But when she tilted her face up toward his, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to lean down, and the proximity alarm shattered the moment like crystal. Both of them sprang apart, reaching for weapons as the Lodge's defensive systems activated. "Found us," Zara breathed, checking the security monitors. 6 vehicles, military configuration. We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach the Lodge. Marcus was already grabbing supplies and loading them into packs. Back exit through the caves behind the Lodge. There's an old mining tunnel that leads to the valley floor, but ... double quotes. She hesitated. But what? It's dangerous. Stable rock, potential cave-ins. My grandmother used to say it was only for desperate times. Marcus shouldered his pack and looked at her seriously. "Princess, I'd say we've officially reached desperate times." As they fled into the mountain depths with the sound of approaching aircraft growing louder above, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of that almost kiss. Whatever was happening between them was definitely complicating his mission. But as pulse blasts began echoing through the Lodge behind them, he realized his mission might be the least of his concerns. The caves were dark, cold, and treacherous, but they offered something the surface couldn't: time to figure out who was hunting them and why. As they navigated the ancient tunnels by the light of emergency glow sticks, Marcus found himself hoping they'd live long enough to find out where this growing attraction might lead. Because despite the danger, despite the political implications, despite every rational reason to maintain professional distance, Marcus Kane was falling for an alien princess who might just get them both killed, and somehow, that felt like the most human thing he'd ever done. The mining tunnels led them deeper into the mountains than either had expected. By the time they emerged from the cave system, dawn was breaking over a landscape of ancient ruins that Zara recognized from childhood stories. "The sanctuary of the First Dynasty," she breathed. Staring at the crystalline structures that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself, "I thought it was just legend." Marcus studied the alien architecture with fascination. The buildings looked organic, as if they'd been grown rather than constructed. Strange symbols covered every surface, pulsing with faint inner light. "Your ancestors built this?" he asked. "According to the stories, yes. But these ruins predate our written history by millennia." Zara approached the nearest structure cautiously. "My grandmother claimed the First Dynasty possessed knowledge that was deliberately forgotten." As they explored the ancient site, Marcus noticed that the symbols seemed to respond to Zara's presence, glowing brighter when she drew near. When she placed her hand on what appeared to be a control panel, the entire structure hummed to life. "Fascinating," a voice said behind them. "The royal bloodline still carries the genetic markers after all these generations." They spun to find General Corvin emerging from the ruins, flanked by a dozen elite soldiers. The general's scarred face wore an expression of cold satisfaction. "Uncle," Zara said carefully, her hand moving toward her weapon. "You're a long way from the capital, as are you, my dear niece. Oh, I must admit you've led us to precisely where we needed to go." Corvin gestured to the ancient structures around them. "Do you know what this place really is?" "A tomb," Zara replied. "A monument to our ancestors. A weapons cache," Corvin corrected. "The First Dynasty didn't disappear, Zara. They transcended. Physical form, but not before hiding the tools of their transcendence here. Tools that could make the Xanthari Empire the dominant force in the galaxy. ... Under proper leadership, Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind. You never wanted the alliance with humanity. You wanted to eliminate potential threats before seizing power yourself. "The human understands quickly," Corvin observed. "Yes, Ambassador Kane, your people's rapid technological development makes them dangerous to long-term Xanthari supremacy. Better to crush them now while we still can?" "And my father?" Zara demanded. "His illness?" Slow-acting toxin, administered gradually through his daily medication. "Nothing immediately fatal, just debilitating enough to justify a regency." Counsel Corvin smiled coldly, "which I will, naturally, lead." Rage flashed in Zara's eyes as she drew her energy blade. "You poisoned your own brother." "I saved the Empire from his weakness," Corvin replied. "Your father believed in cooperation, in sharing power with lesser species. Such sentiment would have destroyed us within a generation." The soldiers raised their weapons, but Corvin held up a hand. No, let me demonstrate the power of the ancients before we end this charade. He approached another control panel, one that Marcus noticed was covered in warning symbols. When Corvin placed his hand on the surface, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Energy coursed through the ancient structures, causing the mountain itself to tremble. The first dynasty weapon, Corvin explained, as power built around them capable of sterilizing entire star systems. With this, the Zenthari Empire will rule unopposed. You're insane, Marcus said. That kind of power will destroy you along with everyone else. Sacrifice is the price of greatness, Corvin replied. But Marcus could see sweat beading on the general's forehead as the ancient energies continued to build. That's when Zara made her move. Her blade carved through two soldiers before they could react, while Marcus dove for cover behind a crystal formation. The ancient ruins erupted into chaos as pulse blasts ricocheted off structures that had stood for millennia. The weapon system is overloading, Marcus shouted over the growing energy buildup. Corvin doesn't know how to control it. Zara fought her way toward her uncle, her blade dancing through defensive patterns as soldiers fell around her. But Marcus could see she wouldn't reach Corvin in time. The general was feeding more and more power into the ancient system, apparently unaware that it was reaching critical mass. The symbols. Old, Marcus called out, pointing to a secondary control panel he'd been studying. They're not activation commands, they're warnings. Understanding flashed in Zara's eyes. She abandoned her assault on Corvin and sprinted toward the panel Marcus had indicated. As she placed both hands on the crystal surface, the wild energy fluctuations began to stabilize. No, Corvin screamed, realizing what she was doing. He drew his sidearm and fired at his own niece. Marcus didn't think. He simply moved, throwing himself between the energy blast and Zara. The pulse caught him in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the crystal wall. Marcus. Zara's anguished cry echoed through the ancient chamber as she completed the shutdown sequence. The weapon system powered down with a sound like dying thunder. Leaving only the hum of normal energy flows, Corvin stared at his weapon in disbelief, then at the bodies of his soldiers scattered around the chamber. You've doomed us all, he snarled at Zara. Without the ancient weapons, the Empire will fall to younger, hungrier species. Then we'll face that challenge with honor, Zara replied, kneeling beside Marcus as he struggled to breathe around his injuries. Instead of becoming monsters ourselves. Honor? Corvin spat. You sound just like your father. He raised his weapon again, but this time, Captain Jorik's voice rang out from the entrance to the ruins. General Corvin, by order of Emperor Valdris, you are under arrest for treason. Palace guards poured into the chamber, surrounding the general, and his remaining soldiers. Jorik himself moved quickly to where Zara crouched over Marcus's still form. The Emperor Zara looked up with desperate hope. My father's alive and recovered, Your Highness. The palace physicians identified the poison and administered the antidote 2 days ago. When you disappeared, he sent us to find you. Jorik's expression darkened as he looked at the general. Your father wants to see his brother face justice personally. As medical personnel worked on Marcus's injuries, Zara held his hand and whispered urgent words in the Zenthari healing tongue. The ancient ruins around them seemed to pulse with sympathetic energy, as if approving of her efforts. Did we? Did we stop him? Marcus asked weakly. We stopped him, Zara confirmed, squeezing his hand. But Marcus, what you did? Blasphemy, seemed like diplomatic thing to do, he managed, earning a laugh that was half sobbed from the princess. You magnificent, foolish human, she whispered, and this time when she leaned down to kiss him, nothing interrupted the moment. The kiss was gentle, full of relief and hope, and the promise of something neither had dared imagine when this all began, as they prepared to return to the capital. Marcus realized that what had started as a diplomatic mission had become something far more personal. The alliance between their peoples would happen, but it would be built on a foundation neither government had anticipated. Sometimes the best diplomacy, he reflected as Zara helped him to the medical transport, happened when you stopped thinking like a diplomat and started acting like a human being.